a federal marshal arrived at the Dover farm in Madison County, Nebraska, with a foreclosure order and a date for the auction. The farm had been in the family for 22 years. The Doivers had made every payment they could, but corn was selling for 8 cents a bushel, less than the cost of harvesting it. Some Nebraska farmers were burning corn for fuel that winter because coal cost more. The math had stopped working, and no amount of effort could change the math. The auction was set for the following week. What happened next has been documented in congressional testimony, newspaper accounts, and the oral histories that historians began collecting from Depression survivors in the 1960s and 70s. It was not an isolated incident. It happened across the Farm Belt hundreds of times in the worst years of 1932 and 33. On the day of the auction, 5,000 farmers showed up, not to buy, to make sure nobody else did. They surrounded the property. They made it understood quietly, without formal announcement, that competitive bidding was not going to happen. When the auctioneer called for bids on the farm equipment, a neighbor bid 5 cents. On the livestock, another neighbor bid 3. On the land itself, someone bid $1. Nobody bid against them. At the end of the auction, the total proceeds were $5.35. The marshal recorded the sale. The dollars got their farm back. These events were called penny auctions. They were organized, coordinated, and backed by the implicit threat of violence. Newies were sometimes hung from barn rafters before the auctioneer arrived, so that outside buyers understood the terms. In Desha, Nebraska, another auction drew 5,000 farmers and netted $2.17. The Iowa Farmers Union organized road blockades, dumping milk and blocking livestock trucks to drive prices up. Their leader, a former grain elevator operator named Milo Reno, told the press, "If we cannot get a square deal any other way, we will use force." The government called it lawlessness. The historical record calls it something else, a community that had decided its survival was worth more than the legal framework that was destroying it. This is the second video in the Great Depression series. Last time we covered the crash of 1929 and the first wave of bank failures, what happened to ordinary depositors, and the documented evidence that the men running the institutions knew more than they told. Today we are going into the depth 1931 through 1933. Who survived the worst years? What they specifically did and what the government did that made everything worse. The answer to who survived is going to be more specific and more instructive than you have probably heard before. By the end of 1932, the United States had been in economic freefall for 3 years. The unemployment rate had climbed from 3% in 1929 to nearly 25%. That number by itself understates the reality. In Cleveland, unemployment hit 50%. In Toledo, it reached 80%. One Soviet trading corporation in New York was receiving an average of 350 applications per day from Americans seeking work in the Soviet Union. The banking system was disintegrating in waves. Britain had abandoned the gold standard in September of 1931, triggering a new round of international panic. The Federal Reserve's response was to raise interest rates, the opposite of what a collapsing economy needed, to defend the dollar's gold convertibility while ordinary Americans lost their savings. Over 800 banks suspended operations in September and October of 1931 alone. The government's rescue operation, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, was supposed to stabilize the system. Its initial capital was $500 million with authority to borrow $2 billion more. It began lending in February of 1932. Bank closings dropped sharply in the first months. It appeared to be working. Then came June. Charles Dawes, former Vice President of the United States, now the RFC's own president, resigned from the RFC on June 6, 1932. 11 days later, his former bank, Central Republic Bank and Trust of Chicago, received an emergency loan from the RFC of $16 million. The bank was hemorrhaging deposits. Dawes flew back to Chicago and was elected the bank's director and chairman at 1 o'clock in the morning on June 27th. At 1:15 in the morning, he informed RFC officials that his bank could not open without more money. At 9:15 that morning, the RFC approved a loan of $90 million against collateral valued at $31 million. The negotiations were completed as Time magazine reported 3 hours after midnight with RFC officials on an open telephone wire. The $90 million was not enough. The bank eventually failed anyway. The RFC's money was gone. 10 months later, 5,000 Chicago school teachers stormed 5 major loop banks. They were owed $30 million, 10 months of unpaid salary, while Doors Bank had received $90 million in emergency funds at 1 o'clock in the morning. A senator watching the crowd outside the banks warned Congress. Outside their doors, a revolt is brewing. He was not wrong about what people felt. He was wrong that it would stay outside. The bonus army arrived in Washington in the spring and summer of 1932. 20,000 veterans of the First World War, many of them with families, who had marched from across the country to demand early payment of bonus certificates they had been promised for their service. Congress had issued the certificates in 1924, redeemable in 1945. The veterans were asking for payment now because 1945 was not going to help them in 1932. Their leader was a man named Walter Waters, 34 years old, a former sergeant from Portland, Oregon, who had lost his job at a cannery. He organized the first group to march from Portland to Washington, and others followed until the Capitol held the largest encampment of veterans in American history. The largest camp on 30 acres of Anacostia Flats across the river from the Capitol had messes, latrines, parade grounds, a church, and schools for the children. Its residents called it Camp Bartlett. The Washington Police Superintendent, Peelan Glassford, himself a brigadier general from the war, treated the veterans with respect, organized fundraisers for them, and attended their boxing matches. The Senate defeated the bonus bill on June 17th. Most veterans stayed. They had no homes to return to. On July 28th, President Hoover ordered the Army to clear the camps. General Douglas MacArthur personally commanded the operation. His forces included 600 soldiers, cavalry, infantry, a machine gun squadron, and 6 tanks. Major George Patton led the cavalry. Major Dwight Eisenhower served as MacArthur's aide and begged him to stay behind. MacArthur refused. Cavalry charged with drawn sabers. Infantry used tear gas and bayonets. The shacks on Anacostia Flats were set ablaze. 2 veterans were killed. William Hushka, a Lithuanian immigrant who had sold his butcher shop to enlist. Eric Carlson, a trench veteran from Oakland, California. A man named Joe Angelo, who had saved Patton's life at the Meuse Argonne in 1918 by dragging him into a shell hole under fire, approached Patton the morning after the rout, seeking help. Patton dismissed him. Secretary of War, Hurley, had twice ordered MacArthur not to cross the Anacostia Bridge. MacArthur ignored the orders. He later said he was too busy. A later Veterans Administration study confirmed that 94% of the marchers were genuine veterans. Hoover and MacArthur had publicly claimed the camp was infiltrated by communists. The documentation did not support them. A bystander watching the Army drive the veterans out of the Capitol shouted, "The American flag means nothing to me after this." Now, who survived? Not who did well in the abstract. Who specifically in the documented record came through the worst depression in American history with their financial position intact or better? The answer divides into 2 categories. The first is people who entered the crisis without debt. The second is people who had built practical assets that retained value when paper assets went to zero. Floyd Odlum was a Methodist minister's son from Michigan who had pulled $40,000 with a business partner in 1923 and built it into an investment trust. In the summer of 1929, something made him uneasy about the market's trajectory. He sold half his portfolio and issued new securities to raise cash. When October came, he was sitting on $14 million, while the rest of the market was being destroyed by margin calls. Between 1930 and 1933, he bought 22 failing investment trusts at prices as low as 60 cents on the dollar. By 1933, his company was the largest investment trust in America. A Goldman Sachs banker gave him the nickname 50 Cent Odom. He did not do anything complicated. He was liquid when everyone else was not. In a deflation, when prices fall and the value of money rises, the person who holds cash is the only one who can act. Everyone else is defending. The modern equivalent of Odlum's position is straightforward. The people watching this video who hold no margin debt, no leverage positions, and a meaningful cash reserve are positioned the way Odom was, not because a depression is inevitable, because if one comes, liquidity is the only asset that functions in the first phase. Joseph Kennedy offers a related lesson. Kennedy entered 1929 with approximately $4 million. By 1935, he had approximately $180 million. He had sold his stock positions before the crash, made additional money short-selling in 1929 and 30, earned several million from Hollywood film consolidation, and sign exclusive import contracts for Scotch whiskey and gin as Prohibition ended. He then bought investment-grade real estate at Depression prices, assets with intrinsic productive value, not paper promises. Kennedy later described his method in 3 words: facts, no sentiment, timing. He had established million-dollar trust funds for each of his 9 children before the crash. The trusts were legally separate from his trading positions. Whatever happened to him personally, those assets were protected. The structural lesson from Kennedy is not about short selling. It is about legal separation of assets. The money he needed to be preserved was not in the same legal structure as the money he was risking. Today's equivalent includes trusts, certain retirement account structures, and if you hold physical metals, private storage that does not appear on any brokerage statement. Now, for the third category of survivors, the one the history books spend the least time on. The penny auction farmers were not wealthy. They were not sophisticated investors. They survived because they had built networks of trust before the crisis arrived, and those networks functioned as a financial structure when the formal financial structure collapsed. In Minnesota, Governor Floyd Odlum declared a foreclosure moratorium in 1933 under direct pressure from organized farmers who made clear that foreclosures would be physically obstructed. The moratorium held. Banks that would have proceeded legally were stopped by the organized refusal of communities to cooperate with the legal process. In the cities, Al Capone opened a soup kitchen in Chicago in November of 1930 that served 2,200 people a day, 3 meals at a cost of $300 per day, entirely from his own funds. It ran for 18 months. A reporter asked the Capone associate why. The associate said in effect that Capone could not stand to watch people starve while nobody else seemed to be doing anything about it. The academic literature on depression survival consistently documents the same finding. People with strong social networks, people who had real relationships with neighbors, community organizations, religious institutions, extended family had access to resources, information, and mutual aid that isolated individuals did not. This is not sentiment. It is structural. Your network is a financial asset. The Depression proved it with a precision that economic theory cannot match. The fourth category is the one this channel rarely discusses because it contradicts the instinct that paper assets always fail in a crisis. In a deflationary collapse, high-grade bonds do not behave like stocks. They appreciate in real terms. When prices fall across the economy, a fixed interest payment from a solvent issuer becomes worth more every month because the dollars it pays out by more than they did when the bond was issued. United States Treasury bonds, high-grade corporate bonds from companies that did not default, and certain municipal bonds held their value and paid income through the entire Depression decade. The people who held them were not flashy. They did not make fortunes the way Odlum did, but they did not lose their wealth either. This is the mirror image of what happens in inflation, where bonds are destroyed and hard assets win. In deflation, the mechanism reverses. The documented record of the 1930s is one of the clearest examples in American history of that reversal in action. The modern parallel requires honesty. Bonds are not universally safe. A bond is only as good as the issuer behind it. In the Depression, corporate bonds from over-leveraged companies defaulted in large numbers. Samuel Insull's bondholders lost everything when his utility empire collapsed. The distinction that mattered was credit quality. Treasury bonds and high-grade issues from solvent issuers held up. Junk held nothing. The fifth category the history books consistently underweight is professional credentials. Doctors still had patients. Lawyers still had clients. Engineers still had projects. Teachers still had classrooms even when pay was delayed. The Depression destroyed financial assets with remarkable efficiency, but it did not destroy the value of a skill that people needed regardless of what the economy was doing. The people who had invested in education and professional expertise before the crisis carried an asset that deflation could not reach. This is harder to quantify than a gold price or a bond yield. But the oral histories are unambiguous. Studs Terkel's interviews with Depression survivors return to it repeatedly. The professionals in the family were the ones who kept the extended network fed, not because they were wealthy. Many had their savings wiped out like everyone else, but because their income, however reduced, never went to zero. The government's response to the depth of the Depression is one of the most documented economic policy failures in American history. It is also one of the most instructive. Herbert Hoover raised taxes in 1932, not slightly. The Revenue Act of 1932 was the largest peacetime tax increase in American history to that point. The top marginal rate went from 25% to 63%. New excise taxes hit gasoline, telephone calls, bank checks, and dozens of ordinary goods. Hoover made 21 speeches about the importance of balancing the budget. The gross domestic product fell nearly 13% that year. He had already signed the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 1930. 1,000 economists had petitioned him not to. Henry Ford had personally lobbied against it. Thomas Lamont of J.P. Morgan had said he almost went on his knees to beg Hoover to veto it. Hoover called it vicious and obnoxious. Then he signed it. American imports collapsed from $4.4 billion to $1.5 billion. Approximately 24 countries retaliated. The international trading system broke down, and the Federal Reserve, the institution specifically designed to prevent financial panics, allowed the money supply to fall nearly 30% between 1930 and 1933. It raised rates when it should have cut them. It closed its discount window when it should have opened it. Ben Bernanke at Milton Friedman's 90th birthday dinner in 2002 acknowledged on behalf of the Federal Reserve directly, "We did it. We are sorry. We will not do it again." The lesson the documented record delivers here is not ideological. It is not an argument for more government or less government. It is something more specific. When a financial system is under severe stress, the institutions managing it will be subject to political pressure, institutional inertia, doctrinal rigidity, and personal conflicts of interest that prevent optimal response. This is documented across every financial crisis in this channel's record. It is not a failure unique to the 1930s. The people who positioned themselves to survive did not do so by predicting what the government would do correctly. They positioned themselves to survive regardless of what the government did by holding assets that did not require government competence to retain their value. The history books give Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt the leading roles in the story of the Depression. They controlled the legislation, the press conferences, the policy decisions. But the primary sources locate something the official history consistently underweights. While Hoover was giving speeches about voluntary cooperation and balanced budgets, while MacArthur was burning the veterans' camp and Doors was getting his $90 million at 1 in the morning, 5,000 Nebraska farmers showed up at an auction and bid 5 cents for a piece of equipment that was worth hundreds. They did not wait for the policy to be corrected. They did not petition the RFC. They did not write letters to their congressmen. They looked at the situation, understood what the rules were doing to their community, and built a parallel structure that operated outside those rules. That is not a 1933 story. Every financial crisis produces a version of it. The question is always the same. How many people are positioned to participate in the parallel structure before they need it? And how many are still waiting for the official one to work? Subscribe so you don't miss part 3. We're going into the New Deal. What Roosevelt actually did. What worked. What didn't. And what the government did to citizens' gold that connects directly to everything this series has documented. Part 3 answers the question of who kept their wealth through the entire decade and how.